Hello, welcome to this training video for Methodist Home for Children. In this training video, we're going to focus on the motivation systems lens of our model of care. And in this training video, we're going to focus on the signature cards that are used as a part of our motivation systems that are very vital. The information we're going to cover you can find in your core manual or your model of care manual on page 22. So let's first do a brief overview of the stages of our motivation system. Our motivation system has 3 stages, and it's fundamental, progressive, and self-determination. And this key thing to remember is that every night the youth has a recognition conference with the staff to review their progress, look at their signature card, add up the signatures they've earned, those positives and correctives, and have a review of that day to see where they stand, and then also to help them plan for a successful day for the next day. And that's very important that recognition conference happens, and that signature card is a key part of that with the motivation system. So, fundamental is that first stage, and the basic principles in that one is that we have 20 signatures a day, and that's universal across all the youth that are on a fundamental stage in the motivation system. On their signature card, we'll have a 20 signature goal. We're going to document those positive and corrective teachings on there, and then they're going to have that recognition conference at the end of each evening to see how they stand. With fundamental, they've got that goal of 20, and if they're short any signatures for that 20, then that number is going to be doubled and added to their signature card in highlights for the next day, and the number that they're short is going to be added to their daily goal for the next day. So if a youth is short 2 signatures, they only had 18, their daily goal the next day would be 22, and their highlights on their card would be 4 highlights. And we'll talk more about what that looks like on the signature card later. Progressive is the next level in the stages of motivation system. And on that system, the signature goal on that signature card is going to be between 10 and 20 as decided by the treatment team. It's going to be a little different in the progressive stage because in the progressive stage, it's a weekly system and they have a weekly goal as well. If a youth in the progressive stage is too short on a daily signature card, then there's no immediate consequence for them. Their goal then will be to focus on making sure they earn signatures enough during that week to hit their weekly goal. If they're more than 2 short, if they're 3 or more short on their daily goal, then the next day that youth will have 5 highlights before they can access their privileges for that day. However, there's also a weekly element to that progressive system in that if they're short any number of signatures on their weekly goal, the following week that youth is going to have 5 highlights every day before they can earn their privileges for that entire week. So it's a little different in that system. So it looks something like this. If youth had their 9 signatures at the end of this day and they had a daily goal of 10, they maintain their privileges the next day. There's no extra signatures needed or anything. But if the youth had 7 signatures at the end of the day on this weekly system, then the next morning they're going to have 5 highlights on their card before they could access their privileges. Again, if the youth doesn't hit their weekly goal, then every day for the following week they're going to have 5 highlights on that signature card in order for them to access their privileges one day at a time again. So now let's look a little bit at using that signature card. And this is a key part of what we do in the motivation system in our residential programs here at Methodist Home for Children. So let's look at this card for John D. John is on the fundamental system. He has a signature goal of 20, you can see, and he has an assigned school goal of 8. That school goal is also determined by the treatment team depending on the needs of each youth. And that school goal counts as part of the 20 signatures for the entire day. So his goal of the day is to end up with 20 positive signatures. 8 of those can come from his time during the school day that day. So now this is John's signature card at the end of the day that we review. As you can see, he's got some corrective signatures and he's got some positive signatures on there. And then when we look at this at the bottom, he's got values checked for each of those teachings, because every teaching interaction should end with a rationale value, and we want to check off on the boxes which value was used during that rationale and value. And then if we look at the numbers here, John had 6 of his signatures earned from his school. He had 16 positive signatures earned throughout the day, which gave him a subtotal of 22 positive signatures. And then he had 6 corrective signatures over here in the shaded boxes. And so we subtract the corrective signatures away, and that leaves him with a total of 16. That's where his card sums up at. So when you look at this, his final end for the day at recognition conference is 16, which means he is short 4 from what his daily goal is, which was 20. So he did not hit his daily goal. Now let's see what this looks like for the next day. So the next day, his card should be prepared to look something like this. Remember, he's on fundamental, so it's a daily access and system to privileges. So he was short 4. So now his daily goal becomes 24 because we had to add 4 because he was short those 4. He's also going to have 8 highlights, 8 highlighted boxes, because we take the number that was short and we double it for the highlights for the next day. These highlighted skills are determined by what were the area that he struggled with the day before and was earning corrective signatures. And so that's what's going to help us decide which 2 or 3 skills we want to put the highlights towards. Those highlighted boxes are going to be put in place for John. This ideally will help keep John motivated, even though he knows he doesn't have privileges starting out this day because he didn't hit his goal before. However, John knows that as he goes through the day and earns signatures, if he can get these 8 highlighted boxes filled in with signatures, then he can then begin to access privileges at that point in the day. So this is what John's signature card will look like as he starts his day. You'll hear us often refer to youth being on highlights for the day. This could be a situation like this. Key things to remember is the goal is never more than 25. So no matter how short John might be on his signature card, it's never going to be a higher goal than 25. We don't want to make it something unattainable. And also, those highlights are never going to be more than 10. So always think there's always going to be a cap of 25 for a goal and 10 for highlights. Because again, we still want to make it something that that youth could possibly work towards and achieve, and make it reasonable and achievable for them, rather than make the numbers or the goals so high that they just totally give up and won't even try. So now let's look at John's card at the end of this day that he started out with highlights. He started out with a goal of 24 and 8 highlights. So we look at what he had. Again, we've got some things here at the end of the day. His signatures are there. One thing to note, if you look at this signature card, when we're talking about signature card use, is somehow through the day there was several times that teachings were completed, but those values were not checked off on the signature card. Ideally, at the end of the day, when we count those signatures for positive teachings, there should be a check mark here or a tick mark, and all those should add up to the same number. All right? So if we look at this and count up, we see John got all 8 of his school signatures for that day. He got 8 points from school. Great. He also had 22 positive signatures that came just from staff teaching interactions throughout the day. That gives him a total of 30 positives right then. We subtract his corrective signatures, which this shows that he had 5 corrective signatures. And so we subtract those, and then John's daily total balance is 25. So we've got all this added up. So if we look at this, now he had 25 as his daily total. Did he hit his goal? He sure did, because his goal was 24. So he actually got 1 above his daily goal. Way to go, John. However, what about those highlights? If you look at the signature card example we have, there is still 1 highlighted box that does not have initials in it. And this is key to remember when using the signature card. John hit his goal for the day, but he didn't complete all of his highlights. So what this means for us is that during this day, John never accessed his privileges. He never accessed privileges. However, moving forward, there's no additional penalty for that. Okay? So while he didn't access privileges for the day at any point because he never got that one last highlighted box completed or filled in, he did do enough work to reach his daily goal. Okay? So that's what we have. So now let's look at his card for the next day. John had this day where he had highlights. He had an adjusted goal of 24 and 8 highlights. He completed that day. He had a wretched goal of 25. So now, the next day, his signature card goes back to completely normal, just like it would have before. His goal has been established already at 20. His school signature goal is still 8, and there are no highlights. Again, key thing to remember is there's no additional highlight carried over because his penalty was that his consequence was he never accessed his privileges the day before. And sometimes staff will want to stop and think, well, he still has that highlight that has to carry over. No, it doesn't carry over because he was able to meet his goal. So he goes back to his typical standard goals for the day. End of this day, we look here and we see signatures that John's got throughout the day. And if you'll notice one thing about this signature card that's helpful for us is if you can look closely, some of these signatures on the positive side have a circle around them. Okay? And sometimes staff may see that and wonder what that is. The reason that happens is that indicates that that signature was earned from a corrective teaching. So when staff comes in to put their first initials here for ask permission, and they put that in the gray box, they put it closest to the center where the dividing line is between the positive signatures and corrective signatures, and staff would go ahead and just circle that box right there to help them know that's where that next signature needs to go. That's key because sometimes, particularly if a youth moves into a redirective teaching and maybe they're unteachable for a little while and it takes a little while before staff can take them through the practices, you've got a quick placeholder, if you will, to know, hey, that's the skill I need to work off. That's where we need to get a signature back in for that practice. And so that's why those are circled right there to show, okay, those were signatures that were earned through a practice from a corrective teaching. These signatures over here on the far side are signatures that were earned just from the youth demonstrating that skill. So let's look at what this ends up at the end of the day. Again, we've got, you see the highlighted values down here across the bottom. They've got their check marks. And then John earned a total of 7 points today from his school card. He earned 20 positive signatures. That gives him 27 as a total. And this day, he only earned 4 corrective teachings. Great. So when we subtract those corrective teachings from the positives, John ends up with a balance of 23. Way to go, John. 23, he went 3 above his daily goal of 20. So that's a very successful day for John with his signature card. Okay? So we see how this works out each time. That leads us to that area. Well, what happens to those extra signatures John's earning? John is able to put those extra signatures he earned in that bank that we call it. And so we keep record of those extra signatures on a daily basis that youth earn that are above what their daily goal is established at. And those get put in their bank and they're able to cash those in at the store, at your program, for whatever those items are in the store. And so that really ties into those various motivations that we have and various reinforcers for youth, because that signature itself really is just a token reinforcer. And then earning privileges for John is his privilege reinforcer and can also be a social reinforcer. And then the material reinforcer comes in really through the bank, when those signatures that are above the daily goal get added up into his bank and he can cash those in for items in the store. So it's another layer of that motivation, and also can be very individualized on what individual or specific youth want to work for when it comes to adding up those extra signatures. Okay? So some things we want to think about when we use that signature card and your daily action working in the motivation system is self-examination. The signature cards are used and open to staff to look at and review all day, any day, at the end of the day, all the time, to help check in what you're actually doing. Because as you go through a day, you can have a lot of things and maybe you assume, hey, I've done a bunch of teachings, and then you realize, well, I haven't got that many on the card, or vice versa. So one, are you consciously using learning theory principles? And that's where we want you to really think about, are you thinking about some of those learning theory principles that we talk about to help use that signature card and make those teachings most effective? Using that consistency with what's happening, using immediacy with teachings, using fading, using shaping as needed, using individual differences that come into play, all those things. We also want you to self-examine in the idea of thinking about, are you completing those recognition conferences with the youth at the end of every day? That's a vital part of what we do in the system. It's part of the motivation system, but it also helps us in relationship development. It really helps us set that youth up for success by knowing, I've reviewed, I know where I stand, there's no surprises, they know how to be planned for a successful day the next day. So it's staff's job to make sure those recognition conferences are happening each evening to review that signature card and close out that day with the youth. You also want to make sure, and the signature card helps you review and self-examine, are you using a variety of those values from the Methodist Home for Children value set? Because we know that respect and responsibility are so easy to attach to any kind of rationale and any skill we work with. But what about those other values, compassion and spirituality and honesty and empowerment? Are we able to pull those in there sometimes? And you looking at your signature card helps you see that. We also want you to think about self-examination and how you use, or are you using immediacy and how you use immediacy. Are you teaching to those behaviors immediately and are you putting them on the card? Because there really is something reinforcing for that kid to hear that teaching immediately when a behavior happens, and also seeing it good on their signature card immediately really is much more effective in our teaching interactions for them. We also want to think about, are you teaching to all youth in the program? And then looking and reviewing and doing that self-examination of the signature cards helps you identify that. If there are certain youths that you're much quicker to complete teaching interactions with, as opposed to evenly teaching to all the youth that are in your care and that you are monitoring and providing supervision for. Now, in reality, you can examine those cards and look at that, and on some days there's a reason that your signatures aren't on a specific youth's card at all, or maybe only once, because that youth was out most of the day on an appointment or with other staff or something like that, and that's understandable and that can happen. But we all do want to make sure we examine those cards and look at them to see that there is no other reasons that we're not on every youth's signature card. And we should kind of be mindful of throughout the day, hey, am I making sure that I'm taking a chance to do teaching interactions with every youth that's in my program, to avoid just focusing on certain youth that might get your attention because of their behaviors, or certain youth that just seem to cooperate very smoothly and easily with teaching interactions. And so then it's kind of easy just to do a lot of teaching interactions with them and avoid a youth maybe that may be a little more resistant. So self-examination helps us see, are we across the board with teaching interactions for all the youth we're working with. We also want to look at and self-examine the ratio that's on those signature cards. Because remember, we have a goal in our motivation system of a 4-to-1 ratio. We're trying to get 4 positive signatures on that signature card for every corrective, so that the motivation system stays a much more positive focused system for the kid and is much more therapeutic and positive driven. So you look at that and you can see on the card and look for your initials and see how many times am I on here for correctives and how many times am I on here for positives. That helps you see, are you hitting that ratio very well at all, or do you really need to do some work? Because you can review a couple of cards and say, well, all you have on there are positives and there's no corrective teachings, or all you have are correctives and there's very few positives. So you can self-examine to see, hey, am I kind of hitting that mark and that goal of a 4-to-1 ratio with our teaching interactions? All these things that you're doing to self-examine and see how well you're utilizing that signature card as it attaches both to learning theory and the motivation system are things that your program manager uses to review too, to help you develop as a staff. So that's our review of the signature card use, in particular with the motivation system. And we want you to remember you can review this material in your core manual. If you have questions about how it applies, or if something's not clear for you, please reach out to your program manager, other Lighthouse certified staff, or any of us on the training team, because we want to help you out and set you up to be successful in the work you do. because that signature card that we use is so vital in the motivation system and the documentation of what we do, and helps us really deliver the services we want to deliver to the youth. We appreciate the work you're doing with our youth and families here at Methodist Home for Children, and we are thankful that you're part of a team that makes a difference.